banks of Sapta Srota, Dhritarashtra is now engaged in beginning Ashtanga Yoga by bathing 3 times daily in the morning, noon, and evening, by performing the Agnihotra sacrifice with fire, and by drinking water only. This helps one control the mind and the senses and frees one completely from thought of familial affection. So, we see here that some of the qualities are given that with the association of Vidurji and by abiding the instructions of Vidurji, what are the transcendental qualities which are manifesting in the personality of Dhritarashtra? He is Upashanta Atmaha. He is completely controlled. What he has controlled is controlled the senses and the subtle mind. Upashanta, Upashanta Atmaha. And he is Vigatai Shane. That means he has become completely detached. Vigat means without. And Shane. Shane means one's affection and one's connection on the family based on one's mother and father. So the yoga system of a mechanical is a mechanical way to control the senses and the mind that divert them from matter to spirit. The preliminary processes are the sitting postures, meditation, spiritual thoughts, manipulations of air passing within the body, and gradual situation in trance, facing the absolute person, Paramatma. Such mechanical ways of rising to the spiritual platform prescribe some regulative principle of taking bath daily 3 times, fasting as far as possible, sitting and concentrating the mind on spiritual matters, and thus gradually becoming free from Vishay or material objectives. Material existence means to be absorbed in the material objective, which is simply illusory. House, country, family, society, country, prosperity, and business are some of the material coverings of the spirit or Atma, and the yoga system helps one to become free from all these illusionary thoughts and gradually turn the mind towards the absolute person, Paramatma. By material association and education, we learn simply to concentrate on flimsy things. But yoga is the process of forgetting them altogether. Modern so called yogis and yoga systems manifest some magical feats, and ignorant persons are attracted by such false things, or they accept the yoga system as a cheap healing process for disease of the gross body. But factually, the yoga system is the process of learning to forget what we have acquired throughout the struggle for existence. Dhritarashtra was also all along engaged in improving family affairs by raising the standard of living of his sons or by usurping the property of the Pandavas for the sake of his own sons. These are common affairs for a man grossly materialistic and without knowledge of the spiritual force. He does not see how this thing can drag one from heaven to hell. By the grace of his younger brother Vidura, Dhritarashtra was enlightened and could see gross illusionary engagements. And by such enlightenment, he was able to leave home for spiritual realization. Shri Narad Dev was just foretelling the way of a spiritual progress in the place where which was sanctified by flow of the celestial Ganga. Drinking water only without solid food is also considered fasting. This is necessary for advancement of spiritual knowledge. A foolish one wants to be a cheap yogi, and without observing the regulative principles, a man who cannot first control his tongue, he can hardly become a yogi. Yogi and bhogi are two opposite terms. The bhogi or the mercy man who eats and drinks cannot be a yogi. For a yogi is never allowed to eat and drink unrestrictedly. We may note with profit how Dhritarashtra began his yoga system by drinking water only and sitting calmly in a place which is in a place with a spiritual atmosphere, deeply absorbed in the thoughts of Lord Hari, the personality of Godhead. Jitashano jitasya Jitashano jitasvasha Pratyahrita sadindriya Hari bhavantya vishtya Raja sarva Raja sarva tamamula. One who has controlled the sitting posture, the yogic asanas, and the breathing process can turn the senses towards the absolute personality of Godhead and thus become immune to the contamination of material modes. Namely mundane goodness, passion, and ignorance. The preliminary activities of the way of yoga are asana, pranayam, pratyahar, dhyan, dharana. Maharaj Dhritarashtra was to attain success in those preliminary actions because he was not seated, in the sanctified place and was concentrating about the one's objective, namely the Supreme Personality of Godhead at hand. Thus all his senses were being immersed. Can someone read? Who is there? Who all is there? Manoram Prabhu? Read, I'm very tired. My eyes are closing. Please read.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So, purport, verse number 54, by His Divine Grace. The preliminary activities of the way of yoga are asana, pranayama, pratyahar, dhyan, dharana, etc. Maharaj Dhritarashtra was to attain success in those preliminary actions because he was seated in a sanctified place and was concentrating upon one objective, namely the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. Thus, all his senses were being engaged in the service of the Lord. This process directly helps the devotee to get freedom from the contaminations of the three material modes of nature. Even the highest mode, the material mode of goodness, is also a cause of material bondage. And what to speak of the other qualities, namely passion and ignorance. Passion and ignorance increases the material propensities of hankering for material enjoyment, and a strong sense of lust provokes the accumulation of wealth and power. One who has conquered these two base mentalities and has raised himself to the platform of goodness, which is full of knowledge and morality, cannot also control the senses, namely the eyes, the tongue, the nose, the ear, and touch. But one who has surrendered himself unto the lotus feet of Lord Hari, as explained, as above mentioned, can transcend all influences of the modes of material nature and be fixed in the service of the Lord. The Bhakti Yoga process therefore directly applies the senses to the loving service of the Lord. This prohibits the performer from engaging in material activities. This process of turning the senses from material attachment to the loving transcendental service of the Lord is called pratyahar, and the very process is called pranayama, and ultimately ending in samadhi or absorption in pleasing the Supreme Lord Hari by all means.
Thank you. विज्ञानात्मनि संयोग्य क्षेत्रजने प्रविल्यपितां ब्रह्मणि आत्मनमधरे गंभीरां प्रभासरा.
So, translation by His Divine Grace, verse number 55. Dhritarashtra will have to amalgamate his pure identity with intelligence and then merge into the Supreme Being with knowledge of his qualitative oneness as a living entity with the Supreme Brahman. Being freed from the blocked sky, he will have to rise to the spiritual sky. So, purport by his divine grace. The living being, by his desiring to lord it over the material world and declining to cooperate with the Supreme Lord, contacts the sum total of the material world, namely the Mahatattva, and from the Mahatattva, his false identity with the material world, intelligence, mind, and senses is developed. This covers his pure spiritual identity by the yogic process when his pure identity is realized in self realization. One has to revert to the original position by amalgamating the five gross elements and the subtle elements, mind and intelligence, into the Mahat Tattva again. Thus, getting freed from the clutches of the Mahat Tattva, he has to merge in the existence of the Super Soul. In other words, he has to realize that qualitatively he is non-different from the super soul, and thus he transcends the material sky by his pure identical intelligence and thus becomes engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. This is the highest perfectional development of spiritual identity, which was attained by Dhritarashtra by the grace of Vidura and Lord. The Lord's mercy was bestowed upon him by his personal contact with Vidura, and when he was actually practicing the instructions of Vidura, the Lord helped him to attain the highest perfectional stage. A pure devotee of the Lord does not live on any planet of the material sky, nor does he feel any contact with material elements. His so called material body does not exist, being surcharged with the spiritual current of the Lord's identical interest, and thus he is permanently freed from all contaminations of the sum total of the Mahat Tattva. He is always in the spiritual sky, which he attains by being transcendental to the sevenfold material coverings by the effect of his devotional service. The conditioned souls are within the coverings, whereas the liberated soul is far beyond the cover. You are muted.
Hare Krishna. So here we see that Dhritarashtra, he attained so much of perfection that all the contamination of the sum total of the Mahatattva, he was freed from all the contamination of the sum total of Mahatattva. So what is the contamination of the Mahatattva? If you know how the creation takes place, you'll be able to answer. No one knows. How is it? This is where the contamination begins. In the material existence, when the jiva comes, the first covering that he gets is from Mahatattva. And what is that covering called? Yes, Dashi bro.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, false ego.
Yes, false ego. False ego. And by the influence of time, which is also the Shakti of the Supreme Lord, the three material modes are agitated. And what has been manifest so far is false ego. So false ego interacts with all the three elements. When it interacts with the mode of goodness, the mind appears. And when it is in the mode of passion, intelligence appears. And then the senses and so many other things appear. So he's freed that way that he has no false ego. If he has no false ego, then what he has? Ego is required for existence. So he has this realization that he is not the enjoyer, he is not the controller. So that is one aspect. Okay, we'll go forward. 57th verse. Sava adya tanadраjan partar parata panchame hari keva kelevaram hasyati swayam taccha bhasmi bhavishyati. O king, he will quit his body most probably on the fifth day from today, and his body will turn to ashes. Who predicted? Who is speaking? Who is speaking that he will quit his body most probably on the fifth day from today, and his body will turn to ashes? Who is
Narad Muni is speaking.
Yes, Narad Muni is speaking about whom?
About Dhritarashtra.
Yes, so he's telling Maharaj Yudhishthira that after 5 days, such is the accurate calculation, he will be dead. Okay, please read the translation. Sorry, the purport.
Yes, Prabhuji. I think 56, Prabhuji, I think we have skipped.
Oh, sorry. I've done that. Okay. Read the translation and the
Yes, Prabhuji. 56 verse, translation by His Divine Grace. He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and will have to be impervious to interactions of the senses, which are influenced by the modes of material nature. After renouncing all material duties, he must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrances on the purport by His Divine Grace. Dhritarashtra had attained by the yogic process the stage of negation of all sorts of material reaction. The effects of the material modes of nature draw the victim to indefatigable desires of enjoying matter, but one can escape such false enjoyment by the yogic process. Every sense is always busy in searching for its food, and thus the conditioned soul is assaulted from all sides and has no chance to become steady in any pursuit. Maharaj Yudhishthir was advised by Narad not to disturb his uncle by attempting to bring him back home. He was now beyond the attraction of anything material. The material modes of nature, the gunas, have their different modes of activities, but above the material modes of nature is a spiritual mode which is absolute. Nirguna means without reaction. The spiritual mode and its effect are identical. Therefore, the spiritual quality is distinguished from its material counterpart by the word nirguna. After complete suspension of the material modes of nature, one is admitted to the spiritual sphere, and action dictated by the spiritual modes is called devotional service or bhakti. Bhakti is therefore nirguna, attained by direct contact with the absolute.
You are muted.
Hare Krishna. So we see here Maharaj Yudhishthir is being informed that in short time how much sense control he has amassed, his uncle Dhritarashtra has amassed, that he is able to transcend the three modes and he is freed and he can return home back to Godhead. 57th verse. Savay adya tanadrajan parata panchame hani kalevaram hasyati swayam Tacha Brahmasmi Bhavishyati. Read the translation and the purport, bro.
Yes, sir. So 57 verse translation by His Divine Grace. O King, he will quit his body most probably on the 5th day from today, and his body will return to ashes. Purport by His Divine Grace. Narad Muni's prophecy prohibited Yudhishthir Maharaj from going to the place where his uncle was staying because even after quitting the body by his own mystic power, Dhritarashtra would not be in need of any funeral ceremony. Narad Muni indicated that his body by itself would burn to ashes. The perfection of yoga system is attained by such mystic power. The yogi is able to quit his body by his own choice of time and can attain any planet he desires by turning the present body into ashes by self-made fire.
दह्यमाने गुणवीर देहे पत्यु पत्नी सहोत जे मयि स्थिता पतिम साध्वी तामग्निम अनुवक्ष्यति. Okay, sorry. While outside serving her husband, who will burn in the fire of mystic power along with his thatched cottage, his chaste wife will enter the fire with rapt attention. Please read.
Yes, so purport by His Divine Grace. Gandhari was an identical chaste lady, a life companion of her husband, and therefore when she saw her husband burning in the fire of mystic yoga, along with his cottage of leaves, she despaired. She left home after losing her 100 sons, and in the forest, she saw that her most beloved husband was also burning. Now she actually felt alone, and therefore she entered the fire of her husband and followed her husband to death. This entering of a chaste lady into the fire of her dead husband is called the sati rite, and the action is considered to be most perfect for a woman. In a later age, this sati rite became an obnoxious criminal affair because the ceremony was forced upon even an unwilling woman. In this fallen age, it is not possible for any lady to follow the sati rite, as chastely as it was done by Gandhari and other in past ages. A chaste wife like Gandhari would feel the separation of her husband to be more burning than actual fire. Such a lady can observe the sati rite voluntarily, and there is no criminal force by anyone. When the rite becomes a formality only and force was applied upon a lady to follow the principle, actually it became criminal, and therefore the ceremony was to be stopped by state law. This prophecy of Narad Muni to Maharaj Yudhishthir forbade him to go to his widowed aunt. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm actually not able to concentrate, very tired. One of my senior god sisters, she is on her final leg of departure of her body. So I was engaged in some service today. So I'll continue tomorrow. I will recap these verses and we will begin the next chapters from tomorrow. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. All of you are making efforts. Some of you are really making sincere efforts. Manoram Prabhu shared with me today. So please make efforts. And when you make efforts, you will see books will move. Hare Krishna. Thank you.